Hi, everybody. Shannon and Bryan here with Own Not Run as we continue our COVID-19 conversations where we're talking to business owners about how they have adjusted during this crazy time, but continue to manage to accelerate their businesses in some way, shape, or form. So we are honored to have our dear friend, Carrie Newhoff here to have a conversation about how he and his team, his business have been impacted. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys again. Last time we were together was the day before the world changed.
Exactly.
Literally.
Which was
Literally, I was at your place hanging out, flew home, and woke up to a whole new world. States of emergency, quarantine, shelter in place, insane. And that was just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, if that trip had been planned a couple days later, it wouldn't have happened.
No, it wouldn't have happened.
That's
We
how
would have canceled. Yeah, no, we were right under there. Anyway, it was a great time back when we used to travel.
I know
remember it well.
I know a lot of our audience knows who you are, but for those who don't, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do in the business that you've been able to create?
Yeah, sure. So my background was in law. That's what I thought I would do with my life. Met my wife in law school, worked for a year in downtown Toronto in law, felt a call into ministry, was a pastor for 20 years of a church called Connexus Church. 5 years ago, I handed that off to the next generation. And so I'm the founding and teaching pastor there. It's a multi-site church north of Toronto, Canada. And for the last 5 years, I've really focused almost full time on communications companies. So I'm a podcaster, author, used to be a speaker. Remember when people spoke and they'd fly into cities?
Together in a room.
Yeah, what was that? I remember, vague memory, but do a lot of speaking. And South by Southwest was one of the events that got canceled this year.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm like, and when they did it, I'm like, yeah, I kind of see it. I'd spoken there in 2019 as you guys did the year before. Yeah. And I'm like, oh yeah, now it makes total sense. So but basically I produce resources. Me and my team produce resources, online resources that really help leaders thrive in life and leadership. That's what we do.
And you do it awesome. You really do a great job with it. So, and we were talking just before we got started here, walk us through like the kind of the week after we saw you, which feels like about 10 years ago, but like when you got home and you started to assess, okay, hey, it looks like this is going to really change our world. What were those things you did? I know you mentioned, sitting down with Sam, talking numbers, like what did that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, as the dominoes started to fall, we spent a week in Atlanta. I did an event there, flew home on the Tuesday, which was the day before the president declared a state of emergency. Yeah. Or no, he didn't do that. He shut down, blocked European travel. Right. Couldn't come. So then I kind of realized I was actually supposed to be at South by Southwest. It was that week. They had called it off the week before. So I'm like, oh, that buys me a couple of extra days, right? Because I'm packing to go to Australia for a 3-week speaking tour, six city, 3-week speaking tour, vacation at the end. I'm getting cold feet. I call them and I'm like, I think I'm going to pull out. And they're like, no, there's no big deal. Well, then, the next day we're on the phone again and they're like, yeah, the world is coming undone right now. Mm-hmm. So, and then literally within hours. So I do I've already flown 50,000 miles this year by the time the crisis hit. Wow. And it's just 6 months of speaking, probably a year of speaking just gone or postponed, which, that is not my primary source of revenue, but it was a meaningful source of revenue. Mm-hmm. And then the real economic engine of our communications company, 98% of what I do is free. It's a freemium model. Yep. So you can go to my blog, my leadership podcast, the whole deal. It's all free to the end user, but we have partners and we have sponsors. But the real scalable part of my business is online courses. So we have about 4 or 5 courses that run in the background, and we usually sell, hundreds, maybe actually thousands a year. And then all of a sudden people start slashing their budget and we see course sales slow to a trickle. So you're right. Within that next week on the Monday, I met with our finance manager, Sam. Sam came over while we could still meet in person, and we went over 3 scenarios, and we had a pretty good, cash position heading into this. I always tend to be a little bit aggressive or conservative, however you look at it on that. So we had some reserves in the company and we were fine for a few months. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I just kept praying about it. I have a Christian faith. What do I do? And it's like, as difficult as this is, and as hard as it is to see, every crisis creates opportunity, and it's a cradle of innovation. And so I started thinking, what does this make possible? It's actually a Michael Hyatt question I heard him ask years ago on one of his podcasts. What does this problem make possible? I just kept asking myself, and I thought, well, I could launch a new podcast. And I had been meeting with David Kinnaman and a guy named Scott Beck out of Colorado about possibly doing some things together in the future. We got on the phone the Monday after the world changed. And by noon, we had a new podcast put together. We had a financial model for it. And so we launched that. And so we don't have an indefinite runway, but that quick pivot to 100% digital company and really focusing gave us a bit of a financial base. I was able to assure my staff that for the next few months, we didn't have to worry. They had jobs. We were going to have to hustle hard. We're pivoting as a company. And we've really overnight gotten rid of the whole in-person piece, which is now pretty much all on hold until 2021, and become a 100% online company.
That is a huge transition for you. I mean, if you think about the impact of the speaking engagements that you had planned, the online courses that you had forecasted to be sold, having this additional podcast on the radar, but not really having it solidified, and then all the impact to your team. It's a lot of transition in a couple of weeks. So I love that you brought up your team, because for us, one of the biggest weights that we're having to burden from all of this is, how is our team going to be impacted? And I know you rely very heavily on your team. You've surrounded yourself with some really remarkable people. Can you share a little bit more about what and how you've communicated with them during this time, other than you're going to be okay for a few months? Beyond that, take us one layer deeper in what and how you've communicated with your team.
Well, part of it was having really reliable numbers, because I hate making false promises. And so it just really wasn't that difficult. We keep our books up to date. It was a surprisingly short meeting when I looked at the worst case scenarios and sort of asked the next 5 questions. And it's like, oh, we're actually okay. And I'm like, okay, well, I can tell them you can't promise indefinitely. And if circumstances get even worse, we may have to have another visit. But I think that, to me, in 25 years of senior leadership, the thing that breaks me up the most is personnel issues. If I ever have to let someone go, I've never really gotten over that. I don't know too many CEOs who have. And so I have a great team. I wanted to keep them engaged, but I also didn't, as people were losing their job minute by minute, like here in Canada, 1 million people applied for unemployment insurance in 7 days.
Wow.
So, I mean, when that's happening in your neighborhood, right, and the jobless rate in the US is spiking and the airline industry is laying off people left, right, and center, that's a reality. The average person is asking, are we going to be able to buy groceries? Am I going to have to turn to the government for aid? Like, what do I need to do? And I think they are all so grateful just to be able to put that on a shelf right now. And as an employer, that makes me extremely happy, because in the church world where I'm really connected, the conversation almost immediately went to layoffs. And I've had friends who have had to lay people off, and it just creates uncertainty. And, without people, it's back to me and a part-time assistant. Like, we move a lot of freight online. The content we produce gets accessed over 1 million times a month. And so, that's not just me sitting at my computer alone. So that was really good. And then I've found more regular check-ins. You guys, I mean, you pioneered this with Belay, but the importance of videos. So it's been a lot of phone calls, a lot of personal check-ins, a lot of video chats, and just letting people know, hey, we're okay. But I would say the other thing on that, the really quick pivot, which happened even in a way that surprised me. I'm a pretty fast mover, but I'm like, how did this? Okay, Monday, I'm going to come up with a new business plan. And like Monday night, we have it. That's weird. Like, that is way too fast in many ways.
That's fast even for you.
But mandates that we do that,
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, you snooze, you lose. You got to be agile at this point. But I think I said to the team, look, this is going to be a lot of work. And so what's happened in the last 2 weeks, recording this in real time, is a podcast went from idea to execution in 7 days, which is like incredible. When if you know the backs, you got it approved by Apple Podcasts and artwork, and show production and get guests lined up. So that went from idea to production in 7 days. And as we're recording this, tomorrow we'll launch an absolutely free online course for leaders about how to lead through crisis. And that went from idea to execution in 10 days, including filming 7 sessions of video, producing show notes, web page, study questions, lining up like everything. And so I don't think I've ever been more proud of my team. And I think that idea that they get up in the morning and they've got something meaningful to do and they can help leaders and we can be part of the solution has been very, very galvanizing. Like we just did an offsite in February in San Diego. We flew everyone in, and of course nobody knew it was coming. We set some goals for the year. You know, we ate well, we had a lot of fun, we hung out in the pool, the hot tub. Like it was everything you hope a retreat would be. But this in many ways has been even more galvanizing for them. And I think it's a guest I had on my podcast, Kathy Heller, her episode will come out this spring, says the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's purpose. And I think what's happened to a lot of business leaders and a lot of team members is they've lost their purpose in this because the job is gone or the company. And so we quickly redefine purpose. And even if it's free right now, we're going to give this for free. We have a few reserves we can draw on to really serve and bless leaders. We're going to do that, but it gets us up in the morning. It gets us excited. So even though it's more work right now, it's been very energizing work.
Well, I think, we've talked about this too, like not approaching people like from a tone deaf perspective, like acknowledging what's really going on in this world and not just trying to shove your product down their throat like nothing ever happened, and I think it's important that folks that are watching this, they're really considering and considerate of what the messages are communicating about the company and their brand right now. Because Donna Miller said something I wholeheartedly agree with, is we will be remembered by how we acted as a company and as a brand 2 years from now. And so, during this time, like people remember the brands and how they were and how they took care of people and so forth. And so I think there is a call to organizations to consider that, and we all got to eat, right? We've all got to pay bills. But I think we will be remember that. So I think it's cool that you're doing a free course.
Well, we're trying to, and obviously, free isn't a business model into the long term, but I think there's a few things. Number one, if you've been blessed, you're blessed to be a blessing. I really believe that theologically, that if God has given you something, you have the responsibility of sharing it. So we were in a season of blessing and we can draw on some of those reserves. Obviously, my wife and I are not going to be taking from the company what we would normally have taken in a normal year. We're all tightening our belts, but I have a roof over my head and that kind of thing. And so we're in a position to give. I think one of the really quick things we had to do, and this took a little while, but we run Facebook ads like a lot of listeners would. And, again, it's for course sales, because course sales are sort of that quiet economic engine that powers all the free stuff that we do. And they just sounded tone deaf. Within 48 hours of this crisis, I got a Slack message from one of my longtime employees, and she's like, this ad sounds awful right now. And at first I'm like, no, it's very successful, leave it. And then, an hour later, I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. And so we actually rewrote the ads. We had to pull down if Facebook ads, we pulled down all the ads with social proof and hundreds of thousands of views. And I think we're feeding them like $1 a month just so they don't die. Maybe more people see them right now because you don't want to lose all that social proof. And we started running some new ads that were appropriate. So when you read them, it's like, oh, these guys know what's going on. And like for the first week or two of the crisis, my inbox kept filling up with people who had clearly written these emails a month or two in advance. They were in some sales sequence. And I'm like, you guys not seen the news lately? So we were really quick to change the tone on all of our email. We went into really crisis mode. And because I'm home, I'm not in airports, which is very inefficient. I'm blogging 2 or 3 times a week. We're doing pivoting on our podcast, launching the new podcast. So basically, we have been 100% about giving really tangible, helpful, real-time resources to leaders to navigate a crisis that none of us have ever been through before. And of course, we haven't got all the answers, but we can hopefully provide some help. So we've actually seen our traffic grow. We've seen just like we're flooded hundreds of messages a day of just thank you from leaders trying to navigate this. And I think that's been very galvanizing. So the whole tone changed. And this will not be evergreen content, but it doesn't really matter because evergreen doesn't really matter right now.
Yeah.
This is a whole new world, right? It's a whole
It
new
is.
world.
It's 100% a whole new world.
And I think you've done a great job to meet your audience where they are in the moment and still serve them.
We're trying. We're praying for leaders. We're trying to get alongside them. And, you know, I led through, 9/11. I led through the Great Recession. I led through SARS in 2003, all of which, as tough as they were, do not seem close to what we're going through right now.
Yeah. This seems pretty strong, for
it's really strong and it's really different. But I think empathy is a really important voice for leaders to have. Yeah. And I think for them to know, like, even one of my favorite things right now is Fallon's Tonight Show from home. Yeah. There's a guy who, a network and a guy who has all the money in the world could have reconstructed a Tonight Show set in his backyard.
Right.
Instead chooses to hang out with his daughters under the stairs and go into the kitchen, and they're doing the artwork. Like, that's a guy who understands all of America is going through this.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come alongside with America and just say, yeah, I'm in this too. And here we are.
Yeah. You touched, Terry, on, how leaders may be feeling right now, or people just in general. And I had shared with you earlier before we got going that I think on Sunday, as I shared with Shannon, I think I had like depression, and I'm just honestly, I've never ever had a feeling like that before. Never in my life. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'm very driven, but I felt a deepness in me on Sunday, and it took me a while to kind of pull that out of me, even sharing it with Shannon just privately. But now you had shared with me something that I think a lot of people may want to recognize if they're feeling this, and it was this what you shared was basically, hey, what you're feeling is a sense of loss.
Yeah.
And I can say that. I mean, we haven't. Yes, we've seen loss in terms of declines and
loss of
things.
Plans and
and
projections and dreams in some ways.
But
yeah.
But I've also felt the loss of you just see what's going on, the loss of humanity, the loss of people's jobs, the loss of people's freedoms. It's normalcy. It's just, and there's no end to it. So what do you say? You called it really well. It's loss.
Can you put your pastor hat on for a minute?
I'll put my pastor hat on. And I've been through that, outside of a crisis. Life and leadership are a series of ungrieved losses. And I had a counselor speak to me about this years ago. And I didn't grieve my losses very well. So think about it. Every time one of your favorite employees, just normal conditions, every time a friend passes away or has a bad diagnosis, or one of your favorite employees says, you know what, I'm going to go start my own thing. I mean, you're happy for them, but that's still a loss.
Sure.
Or it doesn't work out particularly well with your kids in school. It was a tough year. Or, I mean, you name it. You're in a car accident. You lose your favorite car, whatever it happens to be, or a business goes under. That is loss. And what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to grieve our losses. And I did not do that well through my 30s at all. I always pretended, particularly as a guy leader, hey, that's for other people. I'm fine. And it really, really caught up with me, and it walloped me. So when I was 41, I went through a month where basically all that grief is like, hey, you wouldn't let me come out. It all kind of came out. Yeah. And I've learned in that process since then, and that was years ago now, that I've just got to grieve my losses. And so part of that is saying, okay, what am I feeling? And men are not good at naming their emotions. I think generally I'm still not.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, that's loss. Oh, that's grief.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sadness. That's what that is. Because, I think entrepreneurs in particular, we have, happy, driven, angry. That's about the only emotions we really have, right? Happy, driven, angry, happy, driven, angry. Those are my three channels I always have on. And I think it's okay just to name it. And I think in leadership, I was just on a call this morning with a group of pastors, and, their church giving is down, and some of them are leading thousands of people with multiple locations. So that's a lot of pressure. And I said, you're probably also, as a leader, and this is true in business as well, taking on the burdens of your employees, like you feel it, right? Like you may have a tiny bit of margin, or perhaps you don't as a business leader, but your employees are probably on thinner margins, and you feel that. And you feel for your clients who maybe can't pay you, or
Right.
for people for whom that's really, and so you take all this stuff on and you're carrying that around as a leader. So I find, acknowledging it, for me, praying about it.
Right.
I spend some time right here in one of these chairs in the morning, and I spend about an hour just reading scripture, praying, reflecting. And that's when I yield those things over. And it's a much healthier rhythm when you do that regularly. So I would just say to leaders, that's probably what you're feeling. And you're probably feeling some anticipatory grief, and you're feeling some fear and all of those things. And please carve out some silence. Please spend some time thinking, meditating, praying about that. And don't let that, like, do what you did, Bryan. Talk to Shannon, talk to somebody, talk to a friend who wants to help you. And that will, you felt better after having the conversation, even
Oh
though
yeah. Just because I could call it something, and
yeah.
and I just honestly never had a feeling like that before. And I've navigated some loss, but it just felt deeper than normal.
It would have been easy for you to say, I'm just really tired. I had a bad night's sleep, but it was bigger and more than that.
Yeah.
And so I think once you realized, okay, it's not, I don't just need a second nap for the day, feeling something more, and started talking.
And grief comes out in waves too. I've learned that as I've grieved through things. You think you're through it, and then it just shows up. And it's really interesting. Depression does show up as fatigue sometimes. That's true. Another thing, if you don't treat it, it shows up as addiction. And that's when there's a little too much to drink, or, even some things that are good for you, like exercise. All of a sudden your 3-mile run is a 30-mile run. Like, what am I running from? Right? So,
I can't feel my body. What's happening right now?
What's going on? So you got to pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you for that encouragement. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Thanks for being flexible in how you're approaching this discussion. We do that to Carrie all the time, by the way. It's like, let's talk about business. Can you be a pastor for a minute? And
just friends talking.
Just friends talking, for sure. So I think a lot of our listeners would benefit greatly from the free course that you mentioned earlier. So can you talk a little bit more about the content around that and how people can find out information?
Sure. I've targeted specifically at church leaders, but I think the application is there for business leaders as well. And so you'll just have to do a bit of translation. But yeah, I mean, none of us really knows where this is going to land. And at the time of recording this, the experts would suggest we haven't seen the bottom yet. Right. So I think this is not like, oh, this is how you can get through the crisis. Nobody really knows how to get through the crisis, but there are principles that can guide you. So I took some time to reflect back on best practices I've seen, best practices I've read about, and how, people I admire navigate crisis. So I walk through things like how to care for yourself and your team. How do you lead with a non-anxious presence? And that means something very different than it does on social media when that gets quoted. If you actually look at the original context of the quote, it's interesting. So there's some practices and disciplines in that. And then how to make and communicate decisions. Decisions in a crisis season change hourly, and information changes hourly. Hours are like days, days are like weeks, weeks are like years in a crisis. And so what are some principles that can guide you into leadership rather than reactionship? I walk through those. Then there is a unit on methods and missions. And when you're in a crisis, what happens, your mission doesn't change, but all your methods fall apart. So, for example, churches lost their buildings. It's like, well, that's been a method for hundreds of years. In companies, a lot of the clients you serve, they're like, I need virtual help right now because I can't get to my facility, or I have team members who are sick, or they have family members who are sick. So all the methods change, but the mission doesn't. We lose that in a crisis. And then I think churches, like a lot of businesses, are going to default to digital. So I have a unit. We've been a digital church for a long time. I've run a digital company for a long time, virtual company. So I've got a unit on the default to digital and what that will look like. Another one on leading remote teams. Might have picked up one or two things from the two of you on that along the way that we share, because I've been leading a remote team for years. And then finally, how do you lead into the new normal? And I'll give you one actual snippet. I think there are 3 leadership voices in crisis. One is motivation. And most of us, if you're a pastor particularly, that's the only voice you know. It's like, come on, we're going to make it. Everything's going to be great. And then you look at the news and go, crap, it's not great. Like, what if we don't make it? And what if some people don't make it? So if you look at what happened on social in the first week or two, almost every leader was either denying it or trying to motivate people through it, but you hit a wall with motivation.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, all your little pep talks don't work anymore because people are like, no, my mom's in the hospital. So pep talking for that. Or I just lost my job and we have $20,000 in credit card debt. So motivation has its limits. I think one of the crisis leadership voices that is needed right now is the voice of interpretation. And that is, nobody really knows what's going on. So your job as a leader is to interpret from the best possible sources what's happening and try to impute meaning into that in the moment. So you have the voice of interpretation. Can I trust you to be accurate? Can I trust you to take not all the steps, because no one knows all the steps, but the next step in the right direction into the future? So that's interpretation. The third leadership crisis voice is transformation. We will get through this. But as we were talking about, I think before we started recording, air travel hasn't been ever the same since 9/11. And I think we're moving into a new normal. And then your job is to lead people into that new normal, to that season of transformation. And so I kind of unpack what those 3 voices are and how to leverage them, because I think we're learning in this crisis who we can trust and who we can't trust maybe for information, and using those voices appropriately in the right season can help you navigate that. Man, so we cover all that and a lot more.
That's just good stuff, guys. If you're a leader or a person and you are navigating this time, you definitely need to review this course.
So basically everybody. Is what I'm hearing.
So motivation kind of fell apart. I mean, you shouldn't stop motivating people, right? But
that's right.
It's just, everything's awesome. You don't need a friend like that right now.
So for anybody that's crawling out of their foxhole right now and they don't know you for some reason or another, how can anybody find you right now? Like, where are you at? And you're in a lot of places, so please share.
There's a lot of those people, Bryan and Shannon. So anyway, you know what? No one can spell my name. It's Carey Nieuwhof. So I have the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. But if you go to leadlikeneverbefore.com, leadlikeneverbefore.com, that's sort of the gateway into everything. And if you want the crisis course, which should be live and free to you, free to everybody, you can head on over to howtoleadthroughcrisis.com. It's free to you and your team. That my team felt really strongly that, we do have paid products, but this is a time to give. And so we wanted to give.
Yeah. You have a great heart and solid domain, by the way. Yeah. Kudos for snatching that domain.
I couldn't believe it, man. I own 3 of them. So anybody wants to buy a crisis domain, hit me up. Yeah. Yeah,
I bet you own neverwastedcrisis.com too.
That's for a year from now.
Yeah, and if Instagram is a great platform. You're very active on
Carey
that.
Nieuwhof on Instagram. I'm doing a whole bunch of IGTV series on crisis leadership, and just trying to take that stuff day by day. I also blog at careynieuwhof.com, and we've got, you can subscribe to my email newsletter, and it goes out almost daily with new resources on crisis, like those 3 leadership voices and other things we're learning in the process.
Carey is one of the most generous leaders you will ever come across, if you haven't picked that up already. So, Carey, thank you for being generous with your time with us.
Well, I've learned so much from the 2 of you. I was saying, I don't think we'd be in this position as a company. Bryan and Shannon have been kind of mentoring me. They took me under their wing a few years ago and said, let's hang out. And I've learned so much from you guys. I'm also a client of Belay, have been for a number of years. So really benefited from everything you guys are doing. And probably most importantly, just your friendship. I really appreciate you both. You are great leaders and great friends. And it's been a joy to hang out with you.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. Give our love to Tony.
Yeah,
I will. Yeah.
Look forward to seeing you face to face again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Preferably without a face mask.
Yeah, that's right.